my crochet girlies out there. I am also still mourning the loss of Joanne. So, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, to be clear, this is not a person. This is a store. But it was the best store. And I loved it and I miss it and I'm sad. Okay. Hello, welcome back. So nice to see you again. Thank you so much for your support in the last update on ACOTAR. I'm so happy that so many people are ready to keep reading with me. I am so excited. Okay, calm down. I am so excited to keep reading. I am super duper excited to get to the next book. Alas, we had to put up with this one. I really hope this is not anyone's first time reading this series with me, because it is going to be so full of spoilers. Settle in, get cozy. This is chapter 19 and 20 of A Court of Thorns and Roses. The next morning, my paint and supplies arrived from wherever Tamlin or the servants had dug them up, but before Tamlin let me see them, he brought me down hall after hall until we were in a wing of the house I'd never been to, even in my nocturnal exploring. I knew where we were going without his having to say. The marble floors shone so brightly that they had to have been freshly mopped, and that rose-scented breeze floated in through the open windows. All this, he'd done this for me, as if I would have cared about cobwebs or dust. When he paused before a set of wooden doors, the slight smile he gave me was enough to make me blurt, "Why do anything this kind?" The smile faltered. It's been a long time since there was anyone here who appreciated these things. I like seeing them used again, especially when there was such blood and death in every other part of his life. He opened the gallery doors, and the breath was knocked from me. The pale wooden floors gleamed in the clean, bright light pouring in from the windows. The room was empty save for a few large chairs and benches for viewing I barely registered moving into the long gallery, one hand absent-mindedly wrapping around my throat as I looked up at the paintings. So many, so different, yet all arranged to flow together seamlessly. Such different views and snippets and angles of the world. Pastorals, portraits, still lifes. Each a story and an experience. Each a voice shouting or whispering or singing about what that moment, that feeling had been like. Each a cry into the void of time that they had been here, had existed. Some had been painted through eyes like mine, artists who saw in colors and shapes I understood. Some showcased colors I had not considered. These had a bend to the world that told me a different set of eyes had painted them, a portal into the mind of a creature so unlike me, and yet, I looked at its work, and understood, and felt, and cared. I never knew, Tamlin said from behind me, that humans were capable of. He trailed off as I turned, the hand I'd put on my throat sliding down to my chest, where my heart roared with a fierce fit of joy and grief and overwhelming humility. Humility before that magnificent heart. He stood by the doors, head cocked in that animalistic way, the words still lost on his tongue. I wiped at my damp cheeks. It's perfect, wonderful, beyond my wildest imaginings didn't cover it. I kept my hand over my heart. Thank you, I said. It was all I could find to show him what these paintings, to be allowed into this room, meant. Come here whenever you want. I smiled at him, hardly able to contain the brightness in my heart. His returning smile was tentative but shining, and then he left me to admire the gallery at my own leisure. I stayed for hours, stayed until I was drunk on the art, until I was dizzy with hunger and wandered out to find food. After lunch, Alice showed me to an empty room on the first floor with a table full of canvases of various sizes, brushes whose wooden handles gleamed in the perfect clear light, and paints. So many paints, beyond the 4 basic ones I'd hoped for, that the breath was knocked from me again. And when Alice was gone, and the room was quiet and waiting and utterly mine, then I began to paint. Weeks passed, The days melting together, I painted and painted, most of it awful and useless. I never let anyone see it, no matter how much Tamlin prodded and Lucian smirked at my paint-splattered clothes. I never felt satisfied that my work matched the images burning in my mind. Often, I painted from dawn until dusk, sometimes in that room, sometimes out in the garden. Occasionally, I take a break to explore the spring lands with Tamlin as my guide, coming back with fresh ideas that had me leaping out of bed the next morning to sketch or scribble down the scenes or colors as I'd glimpsed them. But there were the days when Tamlin was called away to face the latest threats to his borders, and even painting couldn't distract me until he returned, covered in blood that wasn't his own, sometimes in his beast form, sometimes as the High Lord. He never gave me details, and I didn't presume to ask about them. His safe return was enough. Sounds like someone has a crush. Around the manor itself, there was no sign of creatures like the Naga or the Bogi, but I stayed well away from the western woods, even though I painted them often enough from memory. And my dreams continued to be plagued by the deaths I'd witnessed, the deaths I'd caused, and that horrible pale woman ripping me to shreds, all watched over by a shadow I could never quite glimpse. I slowly stopped being so afraid. Stay with the High Lord. You will be safe. So I did. The spring court was a land of rolling green hills and lush forests and clear bottomless lakes. Magic didn't just abound in the bumps and the hollows, it grew there. Try as I might to paint it, I could never capture it, the feel of it. So sometimes I dared to paint the High Lord, who rode at my side when we wandered his grounds on lazy days. The High Lord whom I was happy to talk to or spend hours in comfortable silence with. It was probably the lulling of magic that clouded my thoughts, and I didn't think of my family until I passed the outer hedge wall one morning, scouting for a new spot to paint. A breeze from the south ruffled my hair, fresh and warm. Spring was now dawning on the mortal world. My family, glamored, cared for, safe, still had no idea where I was. The mortal world, it had moved on without me, as if I had never existed. A whisper of a miserable life, gone, unremembered by anyone whom I'd known or cared for. I didn't paint, nor did I go riding with Tamlin that day. Instead, I sat before a blank canvas, no colors at all in my mind. No one would remember me back home. I was as good as dead to them, and Tamlin had let me forget them. Maybe the pains had even been a distraction, a way to get me to stop complaining, to stop being a pain in his ass about wanting to see my family. Or maybe they were a distraction from whatever was happening with the Blight and Printhean. I had stopped asking, just as the Cyril had ordered, like a stupid, useless, obedient human. It was an effort of stubborn will to make it through dinner. Tamlin and Lucian noticed my mood and kept conversation between themselves. It didn't do much for my growing rage, and when I had eaten my fill, I stalked into the moonlit garden and lost myself in its labyrinth of hedges and flower beds. I didn't care where I was going. After a while, I paused in the rose garden. The moonlight stained the red petals a deep purple and cast a silvery sheen on the white blooms. My father had this garden planted for my mother, Tamlin said from behind me. I didn't bother to face him. I dug my nails into my palms as he stopped by my side. It was a mating present. I stared at the flowers without seeing anything. The flowers I'd painted on the table at home were probably crumbling or gone by now. Nesta might have scraped them off. My nails pricked the skin of my palms. Tamlin providing for them or no, glamoring their memories or no, I'd been erased from their lives, forgotten. I let him erase me. He'd offered me paints and the space and time to practice. He'd shown me pools of starlight. He'd saved my life like some kind of feral knight in a legend, and I'd gulped it down like fairy wine. I was no better than those zealot children of the blessed. Blessed? I think blessed makes sense. I don't know why, it just does. His mask was bronze in the darkness, and the emeralds glittered. You seem upset. I stalked to the nearest rose bush and ripped off a rose, my fingers tearing on the thorns. I ignored the pain, the warmth of the blood that trickled down. I could never paint it accurately, never render it the way those artists had in the gallery pieces. I would never be able to paint Elaine's little garden outside the cottage the way I remembered it, even if my family didn't remember me. He didn't reprimand me for taking one of his parents' roses, parents who were as absent as my own, but who had probably loved each other and loved him better than mine cared for me, a family that would have offered to go in his place if someone had come to steal him away. My fingers stung and ached, but I still held on to the rose as I said, I don't know why I feel so tremendously ashamed of myself for leaving them, why it feels so selfish and horrible to paint. I shouldn't feel that way, should I? I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it. The rose hung limply from my fingers. All those years, what I did for them, and they didn't try to stop you from taking me. There it was, a giant pain that cracked me in two if I thought about it too long. I don't know why I expected them to, why I believed that the Puka's illusion was real that night. I don't know why I bothered still thinking about it, or still caring. He was silent long enough that I added, compared to you, to your borders and magic being weakened, I suppose my self-pity is absurd. If it grieves you, he said, the words caressing my bones, then I don't think it's absurd at all. Why? A flat question, and I took the rose into the bushes. He took my hands, his calloused fingers, strong and sturdy, were gentle as he lifted my bleeding hand to his mouth and kissed my palm, as if that were answer enough. His lips were smooth against my skin, his breath warm, and my knees buckled as he lifted my other hand to his mouth and kissed it too. Kissed it carefully, in a way that made heat begin pounding in my core, between my legs. When he withdrew, my blood shone on his mouth. I glanced at my hands which he still held and found the wounds gone. I looked at his face again, at his gilded mask, the tanness of his skin, the red of his blood-covered lips as he murmured, Don't feel bad for one moment about doing what brings you joy. He stepped closer, releasing one of my hands to tuck the rose I'd plucked behind my ear. I didn't know how it had gotten into his hand, or where the thorns had gone. I couldn't stop myself from pushing. Why do any of this? He leaned in closer, so close that I had to tip my head back to see him. Because your human joy fascinates me. The way you experience things in your lifespan so wildly and deeply and all at once is entrancing. I'm drawn to it, even when I know I shouldn't be, even when I try not to be. Because I was human, and I would grow old, and I didn't let myself get that far as he came closer still. Slowly, as if giving me time to pull away, he brushed his lips against my cheek, soft and warm and heartbreakingly gentle. It was hardly more than a caress before he straightened. I hadn't moved from the moment his mouth had met my skin. One day there will be answers for everything, he said, releasing my hand and stepping away. But not until the time is right, until it's safe. In the dark, his tone was enough to know that his eyes were flecked with bitterness. He left me, and I took a gasping breath, not realizing I'd been holding it, not realizing that I craved his warmth, his nearness, until he was gone. Remember how it became a thing in literally every book ever written after 2010? For the main character to be I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that we had Twilight, Stephanie Meyer to blame for that, right? Lingering mortification over what I'd admitted, what had changed between us, had me skulking out of the manor after breakfast, fleeing for the sanctuary of the woods for some fresh air, and to study the light and colors. I brought my bow and arrows, along with the jeweled hunting knife that Lucian had given me. Better to be armed than caught empty-handed. I crept through the trees and brush for no more than an hour before I felt a presence behind me, coming ever closer, sending the animals running for cover. I smiled to myself, and 20 minutes later, I settled in the crook of a towering elm and waited. Brush rustled, hardly more than a breeze's passing, but I knew what to expect, knew the signs. A snap and roar of fury echoed across the land, scattering the birds. When I climbed out of the tree and walked into the little clearing, I merely crossed my arms and looked up at the High Lord, dangling by his legs from the snare I'd laid. Even upside down, he smiled lazily at me as I approached. Cruel human. That's what you get for stalking someone. He chuckled, and I came close enough to dare stroke a finger along the silken golden hair dangling just above my face, admiring the many colors within it, the hues of yellow and brown and wheat. My heart thundered, and I knew he could probably hear it, but he leaned his head toward me, a silent invitation, and I ran my fingers through his hair, gently, carefully. He purred, the sound rumbling through my fingers, arms, legs, and core. I wondered how that sound would feel if you were fully pressed up against me, skin to skin. I stepped back. He curled upward in a smooth, powerful motion, and swiped with a single claw at the creeping vine I'd used for rope. I took a breath to shout, but he flipped as he fell, landing smoothly on his feet. It would be impossible for me to ever forget what he was, and what he was capable of. He took a step closer to me, the laughter still dancing on his face. Feeling better today? I mumbled some non-committal response. Good, he said, either ignoring or hiding his amusement. But just in case, I wanted to give you this, he added, pulling some papers from his tunic and extending them to me. I bit the inside of my cheek as I stared down at the 3 pieces of paper. It was a series of 5-lined poems. There were 5 of them altogether, and I began sweating at words I didn't recognize. It would take me an entire day just to figure out what these words meant. Before you bolt or start yelling, he said, coming back around to peer over my shoulder. If I dared, I could have leaned back into his chest. His breath warmed my neck, the shell of my ear. He cleared his throat and read the first poem. There was once a lady most beautiful, spirited, if a little unusual. Her friends were few, but how the men did queue, but to all she gave a refusal. My brows rose so high I thought they touched my hairline, and I turned, blinking at him, our breath mingling as he finished the poem with a smile. Without waiting for my response, Tamlin took the papers and stepped a pace away to read the second poem, which wasn't nearly as polite as the first. By the time he read the third poem, my face was burning. Tamlin paused before he read the fourth, and handed me back the papers. Final word in the second and fourth line of each poem, he said, jerking his chin toward the papers in my hands. Unusual, Q. I looked at the second poem. Slaying, conflagration. These are, I started. Your list of words was too interesting to pass up, and not good for love poems at all. When I lifted my brow in silent inquiry, he said, We had contests to see who could write the dirtiest limericks while I was living with my father's warband by the border. I don't particularly enjoy losing, so I took it upon myself to become good at them. I didn't know how he'd remembered that long list I'd compiled. I didn't want to. Sensing I wasn't about to draw an arrow and shoot him, Tamlin took the papers and read the fifth poem, the dirtiest and foulest of them all. When he finished, I tipped back my head and howled, my laughter like sunshine shattering age-hardened eyes. I was still smiling when we walked out of the park and toward the rolling hills, meandering back to the manor. You said, that night in the rose garden, I sucked on my teeth for a moment, you said that your father had planted it for your parents upon their mating, not wedding? High fae mostly marry, he said, his golden skin flushing a bit. But if they're blessed, they'll find their mate, their equal, their match in every way. High fae wed without the mating bond, but if you find your mate, the bond is so deep that marriage is insignificant in comparison. I didn't have the nerve to ask if fairies had ever had mating bonds with humans, but instead dared to say, Where are your parents? What happened to them? A muscle feathered in his jaw, and I regretted the question, if only for the pain that flickered in his eyes. My father. His claws gleamed at his knuckles, but didn't go out any further. I definitely asked the wrong question. I'm serious, Talon has such anger issues. Like, he has zero control, like zero discipline. LeBron needs to chill. My father was as bad as Lucian's. Worse. My 2 older brothers were just like him. They kept slaves, all of them, and my brothers. I was young when the treaty was forged, but I still remember what my brothers used to. He trailed off. It left a mark. Enough of a mark that when I saw you, your house, I wouldn't let myself be like them. Wouldn't bring harm to your family, or you, or subject you to fairy whims. Slaves. There had been slaves here. I didn't want to know. I never looked for traces of them, even 500 years later. I was still little better than chattel to most of his people, his world. That was why he'd offered the loophole, why he'd offered me the freedom to live wherever I wished in Printhean. Thank you, I said. He shrugged as if that would dismiss his kindness, the weight of the guilt that still bore down on him. What about your mother? Tamlin loosed a breath. My mother. She loved my father deeply, too deeply, but they were mated, and even if she saw what a tyrant he was, she wouldn't say an ill word against him. I never expected, never wanted my father's title. My brothers would have never let me live to adolescence if they had suspected that I did. So the moment I was old enough, I joined my father's war band and trained so that I might someday serve my father or whichever of my brothers inherited his title. He flexed his hands as if imagining the claws beneath. I'd realized from an early age that fighting and killing were about the only things I was good at. I doubt that, I said. He gave me a wry smile. Oh, I can play a mean fiddle, but High Lord's sons don't become traveling minstrels. So I trained and fought for my father against whomever he told me to fight, and I would have been happy to leave the scheming to my brothers. But my power kept growing, and I couldn't hide it, not among our kind. He shook his head. Fortunately or unfortunately, they were all killed by the High Lord of an enemy court. Yeah, they were. I was spared for whatever reason, or a cauldron granted luck. My mother, I mourned. The others, a too-tight shrug. My brothers would not have tried to save me from a fate like yours. I looked up at him. Such a brutal, harsh world, with families killing each other for power, for revenge, for spite and control. Perhaps his generosity, his kindness was a reaction to that. Perhaps he'd seen me and found it to be like gazing into a mirror of sorts. I'm sorry about your mother, I said, and it was all I could offer, all he'd once been able to offer me. He gave me a small smile. So that's how you became High Lord. Most High Lords are trained from birth in manners and laws and court warfare. When the title fell to me, it was a rough transition. Many of my father's courtiers defected to other courts rather than have a warrior beast snarling at them. A half-wild beast, as the head once called me. It was an effort to not take his hand, to not reach out to him and tell him that I understood. But I just said, then they're idiots. You've kept these lands protected from the blight, when it seems that the others haven't fared so well. They're idiots, I said again. The darkness flickered in Tamlin's eyes, and his shoulders seemed to curve inward ever so slightly. Before I could ask about it, we cleared the little wood. A spread of hills and knolls laid out ahead. In the distance, there were masked fairies atop many of them, building what seemed to be unlit fires. What are those? I asked, halting. They were setting up bonfires for Kalinmai. It's in 2 days. For what? Fire night? I shook my head. We don't celebrate holidays in the human realm. Not after your people left. In some places, it's forbidden. We don't even remember the names of your gods. What does Fire Night celebrate? He rubbed his neck. It's just a spring ceremony. We light bonfires, and the magic that we create helps regenerate the land for the year ahead. How do you create the magic? There is a ritual, but it's very fairy. He clenched a straw and continued walking away from the unlit fires. You might see more fairies around than usual. Fairies from this court and from other territories who are free to wander across the borders that night. I thought the blight had scared many of them away. It has, but there will be a number of them. Just stay away from them all. You'll be safe in the house, but if you run into one before you light the fires at sundown in 2 days, ignore them. And I'm not invited to your ceremony? No, You're not. He clenched and loosened his fingers again and again, as if trying to keep the claws contained. Though I tried to ignore it, my chest caved a bit. We walked back in the sort of tense silence we hadn't endured in weeks. Tamlin went rigid the moment we entered the gardens, not for me or our awkward conversation, but it was quiet with that horrible stillness that usually meant one of the nastier fairies was around. Tamlin bared his teeth in a low snarl. Stay hidden, and no matter what you overhear, don't come out. Then he was gone. Alone, I took to either side of the gravel path like some gawking idiot. If there was indeed something here, I'd be caught in the open. Perhaps it was shameful not to go to his aid, but he was a high lord. I would just get in the way. I had just ducked behind a hedge when I heard Tamlin and Lucian approaching. I silently swore and froze. Maybe I could sneak across the fields to the stables. If there was something amiss, the stables not only had shelter, but also a horse for me to flee on. I was about to make for the high grasses mere steps beyond the edge of the gardens, when Tamlin's snarl rippled through the air on the other side of the hedge. I turned, just enough to spy them through the dense leaves. Stay hidden, he'd said. If I moved now, I would surely be noticed. I know what day it is, Tamlin said, but not to Lucian. Rather, the two of them faced nothing. Someone who wasn't there. Someone invisible. I would have thought they were playing a prank on me had I not heard a low, disembodied voice reply. Your continued behavior is garnering a lot of interest at court, the voice said, deep and sibilant. I shivered despite the warmth of the day. She has begun wondering why you haven't given up yet, and why Naga wound up dead not too long ago. Tamlin's not like the other fools, Lucian snapped, his shoulders pushed back to raise himself to his full height, more warrior-like than I'd yet seen him. No wonder he had all those weapons in his room. If she expected about heads, then she's more of an idiot than I thought. The voice hissed, and my blood went cold as a noise. Speak you so ill of she who holds your fate in her hands? With one word, she could destroy this pathetic estate. She wasn't pleased when she heard of you dispatching your warriors. The voice now seemed turned toward Tamlin. But, as nothing has come of it, she has chosen to ignore it. There was a deep-throated growl from the High Lord, but his words were calm as he said, Tell her I'm getting sick of cleaning up the trash she dumps on my borders. The voice chuckled, the sound like sand shifting. She sets them loose as gifts, and reminders of what will happen if she catches you trying to break the terms of He's not, Lucian snarled. Now get out. We have enough of your ilk swarming on the borders. We don't need you defiling our home too. For that matter, stay the hell out of the cave. It's not some common road for filth like you to travel through as they please. Tamlin loosed a growl of agreement. The invisible thing laughed again, such a horrible, vicious sound. Though you have a heart of stone, Tamlin, it said, and Tamlin went rigid. You certainly keep a host of fear inside it. The voice sank into a croon. Don't worry, High Lord. It spat the title like a joke. All will be right as rain soon enough. Burn in hell, Lucian replied for Tamlin, and the thing laughed again before a flap of leathery wings boomed. A foul wind bit my face, and everything went silent. They breathed deeply after another moment. I closed my eyes, needing a steadying breath as well. My massive hands clamped onto my shoulders, and I yelped. It's gone, Tamlin said, releasing me. It was all I could do not to sag against the hedges. What did you hear? Lucian demanded, coming around the corner and crossing his arms. I shifted my gaze to Tamlin's face, but found it to be so white with anger at that thing, that I had to look again at Lucian. Nothing I understood, I said, and meant it. None of it made any sense. I couldn't stop shaking. Something about that voice had ripped away the warmth from me. What was that? Tamlin began pacing, the gravel churning beneath his boots. There are certain fairies in Prithian who inspired the legends that you humans are so afraid of. Some, like that one, are myth given flesh. Inside that hissing voice I'd heard the screaming of human victims, the bleating of young maidens whose chests had been split open on sacrificial altars. mansions of court, seemingly different from Tamlin's own. Was that she, the one who had killed Tamlin's parents? A high lady, perhaps, in lieu of a lord? Considering how ruthless the High Fae were to their families, they had to be nightmarish to their enemies, and if there was to be warring between the courts, if the blight had left Tamlin already weakened. If the adder saw her, Lucian said, glancing around. It didn't, Tamlin said. Are you certain it didn't? Tamlin growled over his shoulder, then looked at me, his face still pale with fury, lips tight. I'll see you at dinner. Understanding a dismissal and craving the locked door of my bedroom, I trudged back to the house, contemplating who this she was to make Tamlin and Lucian so nervous and to command that thing as her messenger. A spring breeze whispered that I didn't want to know. I am now facing the perilous task of trying to find a voice for creatures that I am not ready to do. So, just wish me luck. Chapter 20. After a tense dinner during which Tamlin hardly spoke to Lucian or me, I lit all the candles in my room to chase away the shadows. I didn't go outside the following day, and when I sat down to paint, what emerged on my canvas was a tall, skeletally thin gray creature with bat ears and giant membranous wings. Its snout was open in a roar, revealing row after row of fangs as it leaped into flight. As I painted it, I could have sworn that I could smell breath that reeked of carrion, that the air beneath its wings whispered promises of death. The finished product was chilling enough that I had to set aside the painting in the back of the room and go try to persuade Alice to let me help with the Fahrenheit fruit preparations in the kitchen. Anything to avoid going into the garden, where the adder might appear. The day of Fahrenheit, Tamlin had called it, dawned, and I didn't see Tamlin or Lucian all day. As the afternoon shifted into dusk, I found myself again at the main crossroads of the house. None of the bird-faced servants were to be found. The kitchen was empty of staff, and the food they'd been preparing for 2 days. The sound of drums issued. The drum beats came from far away, beyond the garden, past the game park, into the forest that lay beyond. They were deep, probing, a single beat, echoed by 2 responding calls, summoning. I stood by the doors to the garden, staring out over the property as the sky became awash in hues of orange and red. In the distance, upon the sloping hills that led into the woods, a few fires flickered, plumes of dark smoke marring the ruby sky, the unlit bonfires I'd spotted 2 days ago. Not invited, I reminded myself. Not invited to whatever party had all the kitchen fairies tittering and laughing among one another. The drums turned faster, louder. Though I'd grown accustomed to the smell of magic, my nose pricked with the rising tang of metal, stronger than I'd yet sensed it. I took a step forward, then halted on the threshold. I should go back in. Behind me, the setting sun stained the black and white tiles of the hall floor a shimmering shade of tangerine, and my long shadow seemed to pulse to the beat of the drums. It's very interesting because we often see her noticing the lighting and the colors of things, right? Because, well, that's the way that she perceives it as someone who is so fascinated by these aspects. I think it's interesting. As someone who, I'm a fan of lots of arts and crafts, painting is not one that comes easily to me. Or hardly. It doesn't come to me at all. Even the garden, usually buzzing with the orchestra of its denizens, had quieted to hear the drums. There was a string tied to my gut that pulled me toward those hills, commanding me to go, to hear the fairy drums. I might have done just that had Tamlin not appeared from down the hall. He was shirtless, with only the baldric across his muzzle chest. The pommel of his sword glinted golden in the dying sunlight, and the feather tops of arrows were stained red as they poked above his broad shoulder. I stared at him, and he watched me back, the warrior incarnate. "Where are you going?" I managed to get out. "It's Kalanmai," he said flatly. "I have to go." He jerked his chin to the fires and drums. "To do what?" I asked, glancing at the bow in his hand. My heart echoed the drums outside, building into a wilder beat. His green eyes were shadowed beneath the gilded mask. As a High Lord, I have to partake in the great rite. What's the great? Go to your chamber, he snarled and glanced toward the fires. Lock your doors, set up a snare, whatever you do. Why? I demanded. The adder's voice snaked through my memory. Tamlin had said something about a very fairy ritual. What the hell was it? From the weapons, it had to be brutal and violent, especially if Tamlin's beast form wasn't weapon enough. Just do it. His canines began to lengthen. My heart leaped into a gallop. Don't come out until morning. Stronger, faster, the drums beat, and the muscles in Tamlin's neck quivered, as if standing still were somehow painful to him. Are you going into battle? I whispered, and he let out a breathy laugh. He lifted a hand as if to touch my arm, but he lowered it before his fingers could graze the fabric of my tunic. Stay in your chamber, Farah. But please. Before I could ask him to reconsider bringing me along, he took off running. The muscles in his back shifted as he leaped down the short flight of stairs and bounded into the garden, as spry and swift as a stag. Within seconds, he was gone. I did as he commanded, though I soon realized that I locked myself in my room without having eaten dinner. And with the incessant drumming and dozens of bonfires that popped up along the far hills, I couldn't stop pacing up and down my room, gazing out toward the fires burning in the distance. Stay in your chamber. But a wild, wicked voice, weaving in between the drum beats, whispered otherwise. Go, that voice said, tugging at me. Go see. If you haven't read the books, close your eyes. Close your ears. How fun. But now we know that that's the mating bond calling her. Such a fun little... Rhys, love. Can't wait to see you. By 10 o'clock, I could no longer stand it. I followed the drums. The stables were empty, but Tamlin had taught me how to ride bareback these past few weeks, and my white mare was soon trotting along. I didn't need to guide her. She too followed the lure of the drums, and ascended the first of the foothills. Smoke and magic hung thick in the air. Concealed in my hooded cloak, I gaped as I approached the first giant bonfire atop the hill. There were hundreds of high fae milling about, but I couldn't discern any of their features beyond the various masks they wore. Where had they come from? Where did they live, if they belonged to the spring court, but did not dwell in the manor? When I tried to focus on a specific feature of their faces, it became a blur of color. They were more solid when I viewed them from the side of my vision, but if I turned to face them, I was met with shadows and swirling colors. It was magic, some kind of glamour put on me, meant to prevent my viewing them properly, just as my family had been glamored. I would have been furious, would have considered going back to the manor had the drums not echoed through my bones and that wild voice not beckoned to me. I dismounted my mare, but kept close to her as I made my way through the crowd, my telltale human features hidden in the shadows of my hood. I prayed that the smoke and countless scents of various high fae and fairies were enough to cover my human smell, but I checked to ensure that my 2 knives were still at my sides anyway as I moved deeper into the celebration. Though a cluster of drummers played on one side of the fire, the fairies flocked to a trench between 2 nearby hills. I left my horse tied to a solitary sycamore, crowning a knoll, and followed them, savoring the pulsing beat of the drums as it resonated through the earth and into the soles of my feet. No one looked twice in my direction. I almost slid down the steep bank as I entered the hollow. At one end, a cave mouth opened into a soft hillside. Its exterior had been adorned with flowers and branches and leaves, and I could make out the beginnings of a pelt-covered floor just past the cave mouth. What lay inside was hidden from view as the chamber veered away from the entrance, but firelight danced upon the walls. Whatever was occurring inside the cave, or whatever was about to happen, was the focus of the shadowy fairies as they lined either side of a long path leading to it. The path wended between the trenches among the hills, and the high fae swayed in place, moving to the rhythm of the drumming, whose beats sounded in my stomach. I watched them sway, then shifted on my feet. I'd been banned from this? I scanned the firelit area, trying to peer through the veil of night and smoke. I found nothing of interest, and none of the masked fairies paid me any heed. They remained along the path, more and more of them coming each minute. Something was definitely going to happen, whatever this great rite was. I made my way back up to the hillside and stood along the edge of a bonfire near the trees, watching the fairies. I was about to work up the courage to ask a lesser fairy who passed by, a bird-masked servant like Alice, what sort of ritual was going to happen when someone grasped my arm and whirled me around. I know it's not him, but... I blinked at the three strangers, dumbfounded as I beheld their sharp-featured faces, free of mask. They looked like high fae, but there was something slightly different about them, something taller and leaner than Tamlin or Lucian, something crueler in their pitch-black, depthless eyes. Fairies, then. The one grasping my arm smiled down at me, revealing slightly pointed teeth. "Human woman," he murmured, running an eye over me. "We've not seen one of you for a while." I tried yanking my arm back, but he held my elbow firm. "What do you want?" I demanded, keeping my voice steady and cold. The two fairies who flanked him smiled at me, and one grabbed my other arm just as I went for my knife. "Just some Fire Night fun," one of them said, reaching out a pale, too long hand to brush back a lock of my hair. I twisted my head away and tried to step out of his touch, but he held firm. None of the fairies near the bonfire reacted. No one bothered to look. If I cried for help, would someone answer? Would Tamlin answer? I couldn't be that lucky again. I probably used up my allotted portion of luck with the Naga. I yanked my arms in earnest. The grip tightened until it hurt, and they kept my hands well away from my knives. The three of them stepped closer, sealing me off from the others. I glanced around looking for any ally. There were more non-masked fairies here now. The three fairies chuckled, a low hissing noise that ran along my body. I hadn't realized how far I stood from everyone else, how close I'd come to the forest edge. "Leave me alone," I said, louder and angrier than I'd expected, given the shaking that was starting in my knees. "Bold statement from a human on Kalanmai," said the one holding my left arm. The fires didn't reflect in his eyes. It was as if they gobbled up the light. I thought of the Naga, whose horrible exteriors matched their rotten hearts. Somehow, these beautiful ethereal fairies were far worse. "Once the rite's performed, we'll have some fun, won't we? A treat. Such a treat to find a human woman here." I bared my teeth at him. "Get your hands off me," I said, loud enough for anyone to hear. One of them ran a hand down my side, its bony fingers digging into my ribs, my hips. I jerked back, only to slam into the third one, who wove his long fingers through my hair and pressed close. No one looked. No one noticed. "Stop it," I said, but the words came out in a strangled gasp as they began herding me toward the line of trees, toward the darkness. I pushed and thrashed against them. They only hissed. One of them shoved me, and I staggered, falling out of their grasp. The ground welled up beneath me, and I reached for my knives, but sturdy hands grasped me under the shoulders before I could draw them or hit the grass. They were strong hands, warm and broad, not at all like the prodding bony fingers of the three fairies who went utterly still as whoever caught me gently set me upright. Okay, I need to get his voice right. Let's see. "There you are. I've been looking for you," said a deep, sensual male voice I'd never heard. But I kept my eyes on the three fairies, bracing myself for flight, as the male behind me stepped to my side and slipped a casual arm around my shoulders. The three lesser fairies paled, their dark eyes wide. "Thank you for finding her for me," my savior said to them, smooth and polished. "Enjoy the rite." There was enough of a bite beneath his last words that the fairies stiffened. Without further comment, they scuttled back to the bonfires. I stepped out of the shelter of my savior's arms and turned to thank him. Standing before me was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. Yes. And that is 19 and 20 of A Court of Thirds Roses. knew we were gonna get that lucky that we'd be seeing Rhys right now. Who? Not me. Oh, God. I was really swept up with emotion when seeing him again. I really missed him, you know? Rhys is one of my comfort characters. And Vera too, but right now she's still like, she's not. That's how long I've been recording. Oh shit, I forgot to change it. Damn it, guys. Why didn't you remind me? ¿Por qué no me recuerdan? Oh, too late, obviously. He really is one of my comfort characters. Oh, I love him so dearly. I'm so happy to see him. Okay, guys. Well, but thank you so much for joining me. I love these books so much. They still are such a joy for me. I have the best time in there, and I'm so grateful that you have decided to join me reading these again. So thank you. My cheeks literally hurt, all from talking and from smiling. I do have to open my mouth a little bit more to make sure I enunciate better than just in a casual setting, but thank you so much for sticking around until the end. Please consider giving this video a like. Any recommendations down below for how to do any of this better, for content you're hoping to see at some point, maybe new books to check out. Either way, thank you so much. I hope you have a good night. I hope you rest well, and I will see you in the next